Do not be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. He defeated death forever. Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?
On August 16th, 1977, the world was shocked to learn about the death of the king. Elvis Aaron Presley died of a heart attack at his home in Graceland. That's right. Some people don't believe Elvis really died. There's a lot of theories going around, but the most popular theory is that the FBI needed Elvis's help in infiltrating the mafia. And he was doing that, and the mafia got wind of it. And so the mafia put out a hit on Elvis Presley. And so the FBI faked his death so he could go into hiding. As a matter of fact, 20 years after his death, in 1997, a Gallup poll took a survey of Americans, and 4% of Americans still believed that Elvis was alive. They just couldn't deal with the fact that he had died. And I think if we're honest, many of us have those same feelings at times. We lose someone close to us, and we say things like, I can't believe they're gone. I can't believe they're no longer with us. So how much more complicated would it be for you to lose someone and someone tell you, hey, they're not really gone, they're alive? Well, that's what today's all about. Happy Easter, everyone, and welcome to SouthCrest. We are so glad that you chose to worship with us here this morning. You know, Easter is one of those days that kind of changes our mindset in life. It recalibrates us, if you will. Easter is one of those times in our life where it's a time of new beginnings, a fresh starts. When Easter happens, spring is happening, new life is happening, and we're in this mindset of, hey, things can change. Things should change in our lives this time of year. And so we look at Easter as a time to put back what's behind us and move forward in a fresh new start. Now, back when I was in high school, I had run into a very unusual problem. You see, I had taken so many academic classes that my guidance counselor called me into her office my junior year and said, hey, we have a problem. I was like, what's the problem? She said, well, you don't have enough electives to graduate. I'm like, excuse me? She was like, yeah, you've taken all of the academic classes, but you can't graduate without electives. Like, you're kidding me right now, right? I'm sorry, I'm too smart and took like real classes. And she was like, I'm sorry, those are the rules. Rules are rules. And so my senior year, I was forced to take extreme gauntlet of very challenging classes. I took classes like the very first, I started my day with this class. It was called basketball, volleyball, softball. Followed by table tennis, tennis, and racquetball. Leaving there, I went to pottery, then cartooning, then the tech theater, and finally, I ended my day with a class called home ec. Now, I don't know if they offer home ec anymore in school, but back when I was in school, that was a very fancy class where they taught you how to cook, sew, do laundry, and most importantly, take care of children. Now, obviously, they're not going to entrust a bunch of high school kids with like real live children to take care of, and so we did the next best thing. We were to go and buy a bag of flour. And we were to dress the bag of flour and put a face on it and decorate that bag of flour. And that bag of flour was now our child. And we had to name that child and create a birth certificate for that child. And so then the teacher explained to us, hey, you have to carry this bag of flour with you wherever you go. You would not leave a child around, so you can't leave your bag of flour around. And so we had to carry our bag of flour. Every class we went to, the bag of flour came with us. You know, everything we did, we had to have that bag of flour with us. And you had to take it out in public because if one of your classmates or teachers saw you in public without your bag of flour, you would get in trouble and lose points in your grade because you're not going to leave your kid, So that's what we had to do. Now, I ran into a particular problem. This home ec class coincided with soccer season. And coach wouldn't let me carry the bag of flour on the field and play soccer. Neither would the referees. Like, you can't do that. So I went to my teacher and said, hey, I have a problem. I have to carry this bag of flour, but I also have to play soccer, so I can't do both. She goes, well, you're going to have to find a babysitter. And like, dead serious. And I'm like, you're kidding right now, right? She's like, no, yeah. So if being a high school guy carrying a bag of flour around school as my baby wasn't bad enough, I now had to go to people and be like, hey, would you mind watching my bag of flour for a couple hours so I can go play soccer? It's important. Like, don't you mistreat my bag of flour, And so, of course, I found somebody willing to do that, and I should have known with their eagerness to do that was probably not the best choice for me. But hey, anyway, I didn't want to carry the bag of flour anymore, so here's my baby. Watch my baby, right? And so, the problem was this particular game was against a team we've never beaten before. It was out of St. Louis, a team we never played quite a few times, always lost to, and we were winning that game. And so the atmosphere was electric. Everybody is up on the grandstands, cheering, going crazy. And sometime, somewhere in that chaos and that joyful celebration, a tragedy occurred. My baby fell to its death. It hit the ground, poof, big cloud of dust. So after the game, I went to my babysitter and was like, hey, can I get my baby back? And he was like, bad news. Your bag of flour exploded. I was like, great. So I went next day to the teacher and was like, hey, teacher, I have a problem. As you noticed, there is no child with me. My child is no more. And she was devastated. She was like, she almost teared up. I was like, you take this a bit too seriously, okay? But she was like, well, you have two options. I was like, well, okay, what are my options? She was like, well, there's 4 weeks left in the 6-week project, and you can go buy another bag of flour, get another baby and continue on, or you can create a death certificate and I'll give you a B. I'll take the B. Never been happier in my life to take a B. I'll take that B. Here, dead. Here you go. There, the baby died, So, but one thing confused me. When I bought that bag of flour, it was self-rising flour. There was no resurrection. Okay, the whole flour story is true. I did that, but I had to add that. But like my bag of flour, the life of Jesus appears to have been cut short. The life of Jesus, he had so much going for him, it just seemed to end. It seemed that the story was over. He was convicted of inciting people to rebel against the Romans. He was condemned to death by crucifixion. He was nailed to the cross on a hill called Golgotha. Jesus of Nazareth endured all he could. And then there was this final wordless cry, and then silence. The disciples were dejected and confused. They didn't expect a resurrection. The women who went to the tomb the next day went to anoint a corpse. But when they arrived, the tomb was empty. And so begins the story of Easter, with confusion, not with clarity, with mystery, not with certainty, and with doubt, not with faith. With all that in mind, let's take a closer look at what the Bible says about this remarkable day. Looking at the book of Mark, it says this: when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Suppose you were given the task of talking to the men that crucified Jesus and explaining to them that even though they crucified him, that he wasn't dead. How would you do it? It's an interesting question because it's not easy to convince anyone that a resurrection has taken place. Like, what would it take to convince you that someone had been resurrected? What would it take to convince you that, hey, this actually did happen? What if the resurrected person told you things that only the two of you knew? Would you believe it then? Or what if you had a meal with a resurrected person, you saw them eating and doing things that normal living people do? Would you believe it then? Or what if many, many, many people, hundreds and thousands of people told you, we saw this person alive walking around? Would you believe that they were resurrected at that point? Would it make you think, hey, I'm not just dreaming, this could really be something that's happening? Because at the very end of the day, we all know it's very difficult to try to convince someone that someone we knew, someone we loved, someone we were connected to had died and now come back to life. And it would be much harder for us to be convinced if we saw that person die, if we were there when they took their last breath, to say, no, they're alive again. It would almost be impossible for us to believe that they could be resurrected. And a true resurrection hasn't happened in 2,000 years. Because a true resurrection, that person would come to life and never die again. It was hard to believe then. It's hard to believe now. I mean, the odds are against it. It's not something that's going to happen. And we see that unbelief in those who knew him and those who walked with him daily. Going on to Mark 16, verse 9, it says, "Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from where he had cast out 7 demons. So she went and told those who had been with her as they mourned and wept. But when they heard he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After these things, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking into the country. And they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them." According to the Gospel of Luke, when the women came and told the disciples that he had risen, they thought it was an idle tale. They thought they were just hallucinating, seeing things. The Gospel of John says that the disciples had not yet been clued in that he had been risen. In other words, God had not opened their eyes to the fact that he would have risen. You see, there was this cloud of confusion and unbelief stirring amongst them. And even after Jesus appeared to his disciples, one of them wasn't there, he still questioned it. We see this in the book of John. Now Thomas, one of the 12 called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put on your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." And so I want to return to that original question. Suppose you were talking to and teaching the men who had just crucified Jesus, and you were trying to convince them that, hey, that guy you crucified, he's alive. How would you do it? See, that's the challenge that Peter faced on Pentecost 50 days after the resurrection. Peter was addressing a crowd, and he was preaching, and among those present were those who were very involved in the death of Christ on that cross. If they had not actively participated, they had done nothing to stop it either. And so whether voluntary or involuntarily, everyone there was involved in the death of Christ. But rumor had begun to spread in the area that the tomb was empty, that there was no one there. And so Peter decided he was going to address this. So suppose you're Peter on that day. How would you convince people of the resurrection? How would you go about doing that? Because Peter did something very unique. He told them a very simple story and then quoted a psalm. He told them the tale of 2 men. We find this in Acts 2:24. It says, "God raised him up, Speaking of Jesus, loosing the pangs of death because it was not possible for him to be held by it. For David says concerning him, I saw the Lord always before me, for he is at my right hand that I might not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad and my tongue rejoiced. My flesh also will dwell in hope. For you will not abandon my soul to Hades or let your Holy One see corruption. You have made known to me paths of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. Brothers, I must say to you with confidence about the patriarch David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Being therefore a prophet and knowing that God had sworn with an oath of him that he would set one of his descendants on his throne. He foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. This Jesus God raised up, and all of that we are all witnesses. In case you missed anything, let me hit the highlights for you. 2 men died, David and Jesus. 1 man stayed dead. The other man didn't. The first man predicted it. The second man fulfilled it. David was the first man. Jesus was the second. And God was the one who made it all happen. It was a stroke of genius for Peter because the Jews revered 3 men above all other men in the world. Abraham, Moses, and David. Abraham was buried in Hebron, a town south of Jerusalem. Nobody knows for sure where Moses was buried because God took care of that, but everybody knew Moses was dead. And David was buried in Jerusalem. His tomb wasn't far away. Peter was like, hey, you can go visit that tomb right now and see his body in there, no cap. He's there. David had died 1,000 years earlier, but Jesus borrowed Joseph's tomb for about 36 hours. Then he left it behind forever. That's why we call it the borrowed tomb. Jesus didn't plan on staying there very long. Peter then comes to this stirring conclusion as he's speaking. In Acts 2:36, he says this, let all the house of Israel therefore know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. Peter is saying with complete confidence that, hey, Jesus, who you crucified, was the Messiah. He is Lord and he is Christ. So if he's Lord, you better worship him. And if he's the Christ, then you better follow him. To change the life of so many people in the crowd that day. The question is, how is Easter going to impact us and change us today? And I don't mean because we're all going to have stomach aches after eating all the chocolate and candy and everything else later on today. That will change us, and it's very sweet, but it's not what we're here for, right? How does Easter change us? I think it changes us because 2 things happen. The first is this. The stone was rolled away so that we could have access to Jesus. Jesus wanted us to know without a shadow of a doubt that the tomb was empty. This is a simple statement of fact. It's not a religious conspiracy on people's parts. When the women got there, the tomb was empty. When Peter and John ran and got there, the tomb was empty. When the Romans investigated what happened, guess what? The tomb was empty. When the Jewish leaders went to the tomb, guess what? It was empty. The one fact that has been successfully answered by critics of the faith that no one can ever touch is if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then where's his body? Neither the Romans or the Jews leaders would have taken his body. The Romans didn't care about Jesus. They had no skin in the game. It was just another person who died. They have no desire to take his body whatsoever. The Jewish leaders wanted the opposite. They wanted to show his disciples, he's still dead. You worship somebody who was false. They wouldn't have taken it. The disciples had no need of it. Not to mention it was guarded by Roman soldiers who, if you came and tried to rob that tomb or take it, they would have killed you. But guess what? It's empty. There's no body. So if nobody took the body, then what happened to the body? Well, it stands to reason if no one took it, then the body just left. Jesus just got up and said bye and walked out. He resurrected. Now here's the thing about it. Do you know Jesus didn't need the stone to be rolled away for him to get out? I mean, we read later in the book of Acts when Peter's in prison and Peter walks through walls in a city gate. You think Jesus, who turned water into wine, who raised people from the dead, is worried about a rock in his way, he can just pass right through that joker. So then why was the stone rolled away? Peter Marshall puts it this way. The stone was rolled away from the door not to permit Christ to come out, but to enable the disciples to go in. The stone was rolled away so everyone then could see it was empty, and so that you and I today could believe that it was empty. And he did this so we could have better access to him. You see, why was he crucified? He was crucified because we had sinned, and that sin created a barrier between us and God. And Jesus said, hey, I want to remove that barrier, so I'm going to die in your place and remove that barrier that keeps you from God. So do you think he's going to let one more barrier, a stone, get in the way? No. He said, I'm going to take that barrier away as well. We're going to roll that stone back so you can see clearly that I have made access to you and God. There's nothing hindering you anymore in that connection. But I also believe the stone was rolled away for another reason. I believe the stone was rolled away so we could give Jesus access to our hearts. Now let me explain. Jesus will never force himself on anyone. Love doesn't do that. Love doesn't mandate. Love doesn't send ultimatums. You see, you and I have choices to make. And one of those choices are we going to accept what God has done? And no one can make you make that choice. It's a choice that you have to make on your own. I mean, we're told that in Revelation 3:20. He says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. I kick it in, take you by force, and make you one of my own. No, it doesn't say that, does it? It says, if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me. I'm coming 90%. I'm all the way here. I'm knocking. You have to open the door. See, I removed that stone so we could connect to each other, but you have to say, hey, I want you to come back through. I want you to be there. We have to let him have that interest into our hearts, to begin to change us to be more like him. Rick Warren put it this way. He said, Jesus did not die on the cross just so we could live comfortable, well-adjusted lives. His purpose is far deeper. He wants to make us like himself before he takes us to heaven. This is our greatest privilege, our immediate responsibility, and our ultimate destiny. Did you know Easter comes with responsibility? Responsibility to choose to accept what Christ did for you. Look, if we don't believe that, if we don't see that urgency, then Jesus wasted his time. He came for a purpose, on purpose, for you, for your hearts. And we have to step out and take hold of that. So what are we going to do about that today? How will you let the resurrection change you today? So there was this Muslim in South Africa who had become a Christian. And he was asked by some of his friends, hey, why did you change your belief system? Like, I don't understand why you grew up Muslim and decided, I'm going to become a Christian now. And his explanation, I think, is absolutely fantastic. And so it goes like this. He says, say, suppose you were walking down a road and you came to a fork in the road and you didn't know which way to go. But on one side of the fork, there was a dead guy. And on the other side, there was a living person. Who would you ask for directions? You see, Muhammad is dead. Confucius is dead. Everything the world has to offer dies. But Jesus lives. If you're going to choose a path to walk down, why don't you choose the one that's alive? Because here's the thing. We face forks in the road all the time in our lives. And in today's world, in today's generation, it's getting harder and harder to understand truth. Had a friend of mine from Missouri posted a meme. It's a president of a seminary who was saying that you don't have to believe in the bodily resurrection to believe in resurrection. It was a tweet. Below it was Hulk Hogan. You know, I'm going to get you, brother. Hulk Hogan, who said, he is risen. Praise him. Wait, if the Hulkster knows that Jesus rose from the dead, hopefully the seminary professors can figure that out. Our word has gotten so muddied. So how do we know truth from lie? We follow the one who's still living. We follow the one who had prophecy after prophecy told about him. Some of them seemed impossible. He's going to rise from the dead. That can't happen. Guess what? It did. So if I'm going to choose, if I'm going to be at fault in life, I'm going to be at fault with choosing Jesus. Look, if the other way is true, the worst case, I turn to dust and nothing happens to me. Okay, that's what the world believes. You die, that's it, you're done. But if Jesus is true, then if I don't accept him and die, I don't just do nothing, I burn forever in separation from God. That's pretty bad. Or I live forever in glory in his presence. So if I'm going to have an error in my life, I'm going to choose that. The consequences are worse, but the rewards are a whole lot better. We follow truth because truth is truth. Jesus said this in Revelation 1:17. He said this, "Fear not, I am the first and the last. And the living one, I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And I have the keys to death and Hades." You see, there's a message of Easter. There's a reason for our hope. One day, sooner or later, we are going to die. And on that day, we'll lose everything we have on this earth. But we'll keep everything that we earned in heaven. Because death cannot separate us from Jesus Christ. There is no enemy that remains that hasn't been conquered. Jesus conquered them all. And he holds the keys to death and Hades. And that should be our joy today. That should be our heart. To listen to the voice of the risen Christ calling out to us this morning. He says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Rejoice. You have nothing to fear. Sinclair Ferguson once said, "We are adopted into God's family through the resurrection of Christ from the dead, in which he paid all of our obligations to sin, the law, and the devil, in whose family we once lived. Our old status lies in this tomb. A new status is ours through his resurrection." Death, where's your victory? Christ the Lord has risen today. You see, a light shines out from that empty tomb. Death has been defeated. Do you know that Savior? If you look at the cross, he isn't hanging there. If you go to the tomb, he's not in there. It's empty. But if we look at our hearts, for those who have accepted him and followed him, he's living right there. In our hearts, he's with us. He's giving us new life. So the question is he in your heart today? Have you made that choice to follow him? Because he is the Lord, and we must worship him. And he is the Christ that we should follow him.